Hello, I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to talk about our sponsor, Anchor, hopefully at a louder volume this week. First of all, it's free and it has creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. I found it really easy to move the segments around in the editing process, and you can put the ads in wherever you want too, which is really helpful. And Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. This has been super helpful with the success of my first episode, having it on all of these platforms for you guys to listen to. And Anchor does that for you, which makes it super easy. And you can make money from the podcast with no minimum listenership, which is perfect for people like me who are just starting a brand new podcast. So it's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. If you've been thinking about a podcast you want to start, this is me encouraging you to do it. All you got to do is download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm. That's ANCHOR.FM to get started.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Navigating Adulthood and IDD. I am so excited for today's episode. I'm interviewing Christine Devereaux, a good friend of mine, a recreation therapist and advanced teacher of therapeutic yoga working in Denver, Colorado, and the owner of her business, Spectrum Yoga. Welcome, Christine.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you for having me.
Yeah, of course. So to start, we'll kind of if you could take a couple minutes to kind of introduce yourself and tell the listeners who you are and what you do. We can kind of start there.
Sure, yeah. So I own Spectrum Yoga, which is a therapeutic yoga program for really, I say kids, but it's really for all ages, with people with autism, sensory processing challenges, anxiety, and ADHD. They don't have to have those diagnoses. It's anywhere on the spectrum. And typically I see a lot of kids with behavioral challenges and sensory challenges, as well as some motor and physical and emotional challenges as well. So that is what I do. I also provide very few, just because of my schedule, life skills one-on-one sessions. So I teach adults with developmental disabilities how to live independently. So if they're already in a program, I'm just an extra resource to go in and help them with hygiene skills, cooking skills, safety skills, community navigation skills, things like that. So it's kind of a blend of recreation therapy and therapeutic yoga in a wide range of services under those two umbrellas.
Yeah, that's awesome. How did those kind of two worlds collide for you?
So I am a recreation therapist by background, and I worked with primarily adults with developmental disabilities for since 2007. And then I started practicing yoga personally in about 2014, and it completely changed my life. I had crazy anxiety and just a very nervous person. And going to yoga once a week pretty much cured my anxiety. And I thought about all the other added benefits of it and how it would relate to the people I was working with. I worked at DDRC, Developmental Disability Resource Center, as the recreation therapist there. So I started implementing some yoga sessions there. And then I found so I wanted to become a yoga teacher, but I wanted to do it in a therapeutic way. And I know that can be controversial because it's not like everybody with IDD needs therapy all the time. However, there are certain contraindications and there are certain, they need certain adaptations as well. So not all of them, but a lot of them do. And so I was looking for a therapeutic based yoga, and I found that therapeutic yoga and yoga therapy exists. I had no idea before that. So I took a 200-hour and in yoga terms, that's like a basic training. You then have you're certified if you register as a 200-hour yoga teacher. but this was in therapeutic yoga. And so then I started merging recreation therapy and this therapeutic yoga, because they don't talk about autism, they don't talk about IDD, they don't talk about those things in the yoga therapy program. I think they may start, but basically what I did was use common approaches within therapeutic yoga. So one thing is we will work with cooling and heating things. So if somebody has a lot of anger, we would do cooling techniques. So I started kind of blurring the two fields together to make spectrum yoga, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's funny. I don't think I heard of therapeutic yoga until I met you either. So it's definitely kind of this developing. And as a music therapist, it's funny because that's usually the response we get is like, oh, I've never heard of that. So
Yes, same with recreation therapy.
yeah.
It's like, what's that? I just find these fields that no one knows about.
All fields of such important, different recreational, leisure kind of experiences that are so human and so needed and can help with anxiety and can help adults with and without disabilities with all these different skills. So it's kind of funny we're all in these, and then you morph two of them together.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Fields of really cool potential.
Yeah, I think it has a lot of potential. There's obviously not a lot of research in it, but just anecdotally and what I see, I mean, um, just work talking about the kids that I work with, they soak it up. It's such a life skill for them. And then for the adults, they love it too. It's not as an immediate thing, and I think that was from my experience too as an adult. And when we look at pranayama or breathing, one thing when I was going through the program is I reversed my reverse breathing. So that's when you're breathing. You're supposed to breathe in and your chest and stomach expand. And
Right.
then when you breathe out, they kind of sink back. Reverse breathing is the opposite of that. And so you're not getting great air quality.
Mm.
So that can cause anxiety, obviously. So that took me 2 years to reverse my reverse breathing. And I feel like when I was working with adults, I did group classes. Now I work with them privately. But when I was teaching the group classes, I was kind of seeing the same thing. It was a little slower for the body to respond to the techniques than the kids. That's kind of interesting. But that
Yeah.
was my personal experience too.
It's almost like learning the language, just things are harder.
Yes, and we've developed these like dysfunctional patterns, and we've been practicing them longer than a child has. So it's a little easier for a child to pick up on things.
Yeah, for sure. We develop those habits. I feel like a lot of people do the reverse breathing.
Yeah.
I think I even do it a lot too, and have to remind myself like belly breath. And I was in band, but I'm a percussionist, so I don't feel like I got the benefits of my peers because a lot of them know how to breathe correctly.
And that long exhale, they're all chilled out.
Right? But yeah, it's fascinating because I do think that's a really common thing too.
Mm-hmm.
The point with adults and with adults with disabilities, sometimes when we're teaching them, they could have these habits from all kinds of different areas that you could be working on with them. And that's one thing you kind of have to work with them is like, what did they not get maybe in the early
Yes.
childhood intervention, or what was reinforced that might need to be processed a different way or worked on a different way as an adult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And it's even something like going back to TR, we would have clients that they were very capable of just something like putting on their own seatbelt, but had always been done for them. So it was like just teaching them that independent skill. But that's kind of the same thing as like when you are in the same situation or maybe not given certain opportunities your whole life, finding those skill sets as an adult, it just takes a little bit longer. But yeah, I don't.
No, for sure. I know what you're saying. Like that's such
Yeah.
a good point.
Yeah.
Over prompting is such a huge issue with children. And so when they're adults, they either continue to get over prompted by different fields, or you're like, okay, independence, and then what?
Yeah, rip the Band-Aid. Go on.
an adult now. And it's like, wait, yeah, you've been doing this for them for years. And so like
Yes.
on those skills on all levels of how we can kind of tier those independent skills. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like yoga is a really cool way you could break that down and
Mm-hmm.
practicing independent skills almost, like
Yeah,
body movement.
exactly. Yeah. And even just the self-awareness piece of it. And then one thing we work a lot of in class is students always say, I can't do that. It looks too hard. I can't do that.
Right.
So that's not allowed. We're not allowed to say you can't. We say, I try.
I love
And
that.
then they get it. And then the empowerment and the sense of pride that they have is so great. And then next week we do 2 of them, and then we do 3 of them. And so that's another, just building off of what you were saying. It's really cool to see that.
I love that so much. That's
Yeah.
awesome. I
Yeah.
gotta use that in some of my work too. Yeah, for sure. Just being like, well, we're gonna try.
Yep. There's no I can't. There's I'll try.
Right. And then to reward like even the trying versus like having a certain outcome necessarily.
Yes. Exactly. Yes. That's a goal in itself a lot of times. Yeah, just trying something new.
Right.
Mhm.
Awesome. All right, I'm gonna backtrack a little bit.
Mhm.
So, you've been working with adults with disabilities for a while. So, kind
Mhm.
of, how did you get interested in working with them? And you kind of already answered when you started working with them, but you can kind of remind us too.
Yeah. So, okay. So I was in therapeutic recreation, and I don't know if it's the same now. I feel like I'm old now, but back in the day, so I graduated college in 2009. So in 2007 I started hitting those like TR courses, and every teacher wanted you to know what population you wanted to work with. And I always thought, how does anyone know? Like I would ask all my fellow students, how do you know? And they would always say, I just know. So I'm like, well, I don't know. So anyway, we have to do a practicum, an internship, and a certain amount of volunteer hours. So I used those opportunities to explore working in different settings and with different populations. So I worked with adults, or I worked in a skilled nursing facility. I worked with kids. I worked with in a psych unit, and then I didn't think I wanted to work with adults with developmental disabilities. I don't know why. I was just like, I don't think I want to. But then my internship came, and I wasn't sure where I wanted to go, and there was an opportunity at DDRC, which I discussed, and I was like, I'll just go and see what it's like. And I spoke with Terry Holstrom, who's the manager there now, and it was awesome. I fell in love. I applied. I got it, and I never looked back. It was the best thing. I coached Special Olympics basketball, softball, and then we did a bunch of other like fitness programs. I created what was it called? Fun and Fit program. It was like a 4-week program for adults with developmental disabilities. We were doing cooking programs, but they were kind of, I don't know the right word for it. It was basically we bought like brownie boxes and then had a group of 10 people and we made brownies. So it's not really cooking, because it was like you get to crack the egg. You get to drop the egg. There's too many people and not enough
Not enough.
things. So we revamped the cooking program and kind of focused more on healthy options. Of course, we were still providing fun food options, but it wasn't every option was like a fun food type of thing. So anyway, that's my jam. I love all that. And so that's what I worked there for probably, well, after the internship, there wasn't a position open. So I worked for the city of Lakewood. And keep in mind, this was right after the 2008 like crash of the economy. And so there was actually only 1.5 jobs in Colorado for recreation therapy by the time I graduated. And the full-time job was in, I think, Colorado Springs, and I did not want that. So I got the part-time job at the city of Lakewood and worked there. And then a job at DDRC opened up and I got in. So that's kind of the path there.
That's sweet. And you were talking about like your classmates were like, oh, I just knew. And you knew it just, you had to work, like you had to find kind of them later. And then you knew too.
Yeah, because I feel like, I don't know, I still feel like, how do you just know? Unless you have a family member, if you've been in a skilled nursing facility for your grandma or something, and then you're like, that inspired me so much. I know I want to work with this population or whatever. I don't get it. How people sometimes just know. I still don't get it.
Right. Well, I mean, my sister was the first episode and she has autism, but actually I didn't think about working with individuals with special needs or disabilities. It was about probably mid undergrad. I went, oh, I could work with individuals with disabilities like my sister.
I know someone.
I just never really connected that, but then once it kind of clicked, I really enjoyed those practicums. So
Yeah, yeah, and I love that because I listened to that first episode. That was such a great episode. That was so wonderful. But you even said that, it wasn't like your sister with autism. She was just your sister.
right.
So that makes a lot of sense, and that's beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sarah's so fun.
she's so fun.
I think I'll have to have her back sometime.
Definitely.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
So, we talked about the cooking a little bit, and you also mentioned you're working with adults with yoga one-on-one. So, could you talk about those a little more, and maybe even how's it going during all of this? And
Oh, yeah.
are you still able to offer the cooking? Are you still doing any like online stuff?
Yes, so no to the cooking. And actually, the client I was seeing, we've kind of taken a break now. She moved back to her hometown, but the other adult that I'm working with, we're doing primarily yoga, and we're doing it virtually. And yeah, he's over it. He's over it. It's going well. He's such a champ, but he's had enough of this virtual stuff. So for me, primarily, what I've noticed during this quarantine period with this guy that I'm working with is we're really moving away from goal progression, and we're just trying to maintain right now. There's been some setbacks and behaviors, and you could call it regression. You could also call it increased stress, anxiety. He doesn't know, for him, routines are so important. His social life is so important to him. So he's not seeing his friends at school. He is called the mayor of his school, and he goes around and makes pizzadillas for everyone, and they just love him, of course. But he doesn't get that now, and so the last week it was a lot of talking. We just had to talk through a lot of things, and that was probably about 30 minutes, and then we could get into some yoga stuff, and then we could get into some emotional processing. But he was so he had a lot of stress and was really in fight or flight, and was having some behavioral challenges that he hasn't really had in, I'd say, a year. But his routine is disrupted. He doesn't know when he keeps asking, when are you coming back over? And I can't give him an answer, and that he does not like that. And then he's nervous too. One of the things that came up in the processing was he's nervous his parents are going to get the virus. So there's more talking going on than yoga intervention. What you could call it yoga. Yoga is really being present. So we are doing yoga, but not what we were doing. We're not doing a lot of the techniques that we were. We're still doing some stress relief meditations. We do hand yoga and pranayama breathing techniques, and those are really helpful for interoception and then expressing and processing a lot of this. But any more than that, it's it's not possible. It's really shifted.
Right. Oh, for sure. Yeah, I felt that with some of my clients too. It's really tough
Yeah.
right now, and yeah, and there's like no good answer too. 'Cause it's like
There's really not. And I always say, I wish I could give you an answer, but I can't. And you just see the frustration because, he looks to all the people that he works with for the answers or the deadline, the date, his routine, and no one can tell him. So
yeah.
yeah, it's kind of sad. And yeah.
The reality of a lot of the situation, and with kids and adults, just kind of the people we work with being really aware of their needs in this time.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's stressful. It's a pandemic, so yeah, maybe we are talking most of the session, but
Mm-hmm.
need they need that processing time. Then even if it doesn't look like traditional yoga or a traditional session, I think you're
Yes.
doing the best you can.
Mm-hmm. And if you look at a lot of the goals that we have, and I'm sure even as a music therapist, talking would fulfill a lot of that. I mean, if there's high stress, high anxiety, and you're doing an intervention for that, but they're so stressed and so anxious they can't do the music intervention, but talking would help. I mean, you're
Yeah,
still doing you're
right,
what you had set out to do. It just looks different.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like everything looks different.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's challenging for all of us too, and that's what I keep telling him too, is you're not alone. It's stressful for me, it's stressful for your mom, it's stressful for everyone.
Right. And then at least he can still connect, even online. Hopefully
Yes.
it's something like just so he
Yeah.
can connect and process through it too, because
Hmm.
I can't imagine what we'd be doing without the technology we have right now. Like, and it's,
Yes.
I don't even
And yeah, and what the families would do, I feel so uh I feel so bad, and my heart goes out to all the parents right now, especially with kids, and even their kids who are adults, who supports have just been taken from them. Like, I don't know, their stress is very high too. So
yeah, and all the social groups, like all the day programs, it's breaking my heart because that's like
yeah.
and it's what these adults thrive for, like going to these groups and socializing with their peers. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
and hopefully they're getting the online version of it, but still, it's tough and
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah,
process of it.
it really is. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, the other adult that I was seeing, we we did have to stop, and I'm sure we could have done some cooking virtually, like no bake type of stuff, no, almost like no bake like healthy cookies or making marinades and salads and stuff. But yeah, it's just tough times too. So stopping sessions were best for her right now.
Yeah, I definitely have people like that too. So sometimes the overwhelm, you can tell. It's like,
Yes. Yes.
here if you need me, but
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. But understand if you don't right now. Yes.
honestly,
Yeah.
so tough. But
Yeah.
we'll get through
Yes.
it.
I'm hoping it's almost over. I feel like there's a little light, but just don't know.
Yep, one day at a time.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
All right, I'll change the mood here.
That's good.
Kind of random question. Uh,
Okay.
what is the main difference, if any, between kids yoga and yoga with adults or older students?
That's such a great question. The only difference for me is wording and cueing. So I have my YouTube channel, and I do these classes on YouTube, and I have playlists, so it'll be like um, mindfulness for kids age 7 and up, or movement for kids age 6 and up, and it really is all the way up because well, one, it's very generalized because YouTube, I can't see who's on the other side. But it's the same thing when I teach kids classes, I'll plan a class and I know what order I'll go in for the kids in that class. So say it's a class for my hyper kiddos. We're not going to say to start class, everyone is sitting down, don't talk and don't move. We're going to tune in, for those kids, we're moving right away, moving, getting the energy out. And then we get into um, the tuning in. And that would be the same for my hyper adults. And so I teach classes for garden as well. So for my teens class and their class, I plan the same class. And then it's just different. I use different words and talk to them differently, basically. We play games in both classes. We are silly in both classes. We tune in, we are mindful, we meditate, we socialize. There's really nothing different except for, I would say the only difference is in age. Well, the only difference is in an adult class versus a kids class for what I do is the cueing and the words and the way I talk. But outside of that, there's differences on more energy levels and behavioral imbalances, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Kids classes, you can let them, you can kind of expect the energy is going to be high. So.
Yes. Now, my other kids class that they don't really have high energy, we can sit down and it can be like an adult class or the teens class. It's really a lot of the kids that are like sensory craving or have ADHD, or sensory over responsive. They kind of I set up my classes specific for those. They get their challenges overlap.
Yeah.
Where if there's a kid with sensor under responsivity or a kid with autism who needs like slower direction or not as loud noise, whatever, we can structure the class for those common challenges. So that's kind of the way I do that.
Yeah. Awesome.
And adults too. That would be the same thing. I don't, and this is controversial a little bit, I don't really think there can be like a yoga class for everyone when you're working with people with autism and sensory processing challenges and ADHD. Because if you have someone coming into your class, that's for everyone, but someone needs loud music, lots of noise, lots of lights, fast movement, fast paced, lots of pressure and stimuli. But then you have another student that comes in and all of that would dysregulate them and spin them out for hours. It's actually a contraindication. So what I like to say is make your services inclusive and then your classes are specific to needs.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I like how you think more about separating it by like sensory needs versus like age necessity,
Yes. Yeah.
You could have maybe a kid that, I'm trying to find the right words, like a kid that, maybe isn't high energy could be in a group of maybe older kids versus a group of younger kids, like if that's kind of where the sensory needs are at. So that's really cool.
Yeah, exactly. I do have, I think, how old is she? 10, a 10-year-old in my teens class. And I forget she's not a teen. She could run the class. She's more mature than me. And yeah, so it's all about needs. And so when a lot of parents come to me and like, my kid's this age, could they come to this class? Then it's followed up by questions that aren't age-based. It's more like developmentally or sensory or behavioral based.
Yeah, I love that. I like
Yeah,
that.
that would be the same for adults too. And we're talking about kids a lot, so sorry, because it's the adults.
Because of the populations we work with, it's interesting to talk about kids and adults because the kids become adults. So
exactly,
how are we working with the children too? And
perfect.
Compare because
yes,
they're going to end up being the adults that we're serving as well too. So I think this is important to kind of be discussing and looking at both lens of the age spectrum.
That's perfect. I agree. Yeah.
And that's interesting. You said you changed the wording because at least I think I don't. But
Oh.
by that, I mean, I talk to kids almost like they're adults
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of times, a lot of like, especially even nonverbal kids that are older, I worry that they get like a lot of like baby over prompting kind of talk, and maybe they're 10 and they're still a kid, but I'll talk to that kid more, just kind of, I kind of almost think like I'm talking to a person. So I do think I talk like an adult sometimes to kids, although not the tiny ones.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't really talk to them like they're kids. It's more cueing as far as what are the words they're likely to understand. And I'm not assuming ahead of time, but there's a little bit more explanation with kids sometimes, and that you have to be careful because you can't just be talking the whole time, especially for kids that are sensory sensitive or have auditory sensory.
Right.
You're just hammering their ears with your words. So it's a little bit tricky. Where the adults may have been going to yoga for a little bit longer, where I can just say, we're going to get into a downward dog and we're
Okay,
breathing.
yeah, they're gonna
And
know the
then, yeah. So the cueing, so in yoga, there's different cueings, there's different sequences, there's different, like, the language and communication piece is very much a part of your teaching, which I think in any therapy, but there's Sanskrit, there's new words that are English, but that kids have never heard. So it's when they come into yoga class, they're like, this is weird. And so we're working with that a lot more than with the adults.
Yeah.
So,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah. Oh, okay, awesome. That's really good to know, and to even like think back in my own practices too, to make sure I'm not speaking music ease. I do that sometimes.
It's hard not to, because you have like the clinical
Right.
educational background and you're implementing it if it's like a therapy session clinically. So it's hard to be in a clinical situation and talk almost in like a community
Yeah.
situation. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. So, have you had any difficulty finding resources for working with adults with disabilities?
My whole career.
In fact,
So,
you helped to lead a survey, right?
yes. So, okay. When I first started my internship, actually, and I would Google activities for adults, and then basically for adults with developmental disabilities, and then I would adapt them for the people I was working with, or had the intention to do that. There was nothing. It was all kids stuff, and then I'd have to adapt it even more for age. It would be, pull a kid around on a blanket. It's like, well, we can't really do that with an adult. That is not super appropriate unless there's a fun, weird game. But so it was really challenging. So I created a lot, as a lot of TRs do. You create your own programs and you adapt them, and they're goal based and all of that. But I wanted to see if I was the only one having these issues and on what scale, or if everyone was. So Ryan and I created a national survey, and it was geared towards rec therapists. And this was in 2015, so I'm a little rusty on it. But it was basically to discover um, how do rec therapists or anybody in the activity professions or working with the people that we're working with, how do they feel about the resources available to them, or do they feel they do have resources available to them? And then also their perception of their work environment, the field that they're in, and all of that. So I wanted to see about, one, what are the resources, how do you feel about the resources available, the efficacy of the resources available, and there was a third one I can't remember with that.
Enabling client independence.
Yes. Okay. So that was another thing, was when I felt personally, my education as a rec therapist varied vastly from getting into the field of rec therapy. I felt my education was very clinical based, independence heavy. We talked about efficiency of care, effectiveness of care. We talked about goals, goal-oriented practices, all of that. And then when I got into the field, and in almost every setting, it seemed that wasn't a priority. It seemed I wasn't the annoying staff member that was like, hey guys, this isn't clinical enough. And I probably was, but that's why I went into therapeutic rec. I liked that aspect of it, making something therapeutic and fun. Like, what? That's the best. So then when that wasn't the case, and so that was another aspect of the survey was I'm not really seeing, like, we are going out into the community and we're going to the movies, say, but where's the independence goals? What's actually being achieved here if we are saying we're doing therapeutic rec? If we're saying we're doing activities and we're doing community participation, that's one thing. But if we're doing therapeutic recreation, I felt that's different. So I wanted to see what people across the country thought too. And we got some really good answers, I felt. So let me pull this back up. Okay, so we got a pretty good response, 245 responses. I mean, it's not a big number, but and at the time was no one, just cold emailing a bunch of people across the country. So I felt like that was a pretty good number. And then we tracked who's responding. So are you a CTRS, a service provider, other? And then we wanted to also see the organizational levels. So are you a manager level, director level, that kind of thing. And then I wanted to get perspective of parents and caregivers too, which not a lot of them replied. They were hard to reach as well. So so one thing, most people worked with developmental disabilities. And then the second highest was Alzheimer's and dementia. So I thought that was interesting because I think in Colorado we're pretty community heavy based. And so that made sense here, but I wasn't sure nationally. And then you can see too in the community area, most people worked in the community setting versus clinical setting. So I don't know if music therapists have that same thing, but like,
our jobs are kind of all over the place. There's some medical that's kind of growing still. Schools is very regional dependent. A lot of private practices. I'd have to look at what the survey says, but I feel like that might be the majority is private practice.
oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. And I know because you guys can bill insurance, so that's huge. TR can't on a national level. There are some states that can. So it's up to the states to decide. So most, if they don't take insurance, then they're pretty much community based.
Yeah. And I think music therapy is pretty state
Okay.
based too. Colorado's got some waivers that cover it with Medicaid, but I don't think every state does.
Yeah. Okay.
But don't quote me on that.
Yeah, no, I know. So let's see. Okay. So we wanted to look at what are the underlying problems that cause the most significant challenges, basically to provide the independence and to do your job as you see how you want to do your job. Mm-hmm. So most of the people that responded with challenging behaviors. I worded this differently, but it's challenging behaviors. And one thing that I saw too, and which was great to get the directors and managers input, was motivation of staff was very high for manager level. If you look on, let's see, page 12, that comes in about third place. So for managers. But then when you look at like most important needs, so there's challenges and then there's needs. And so we broke needs up into like funding, internal support, resources, staff pay. Those are like departmental needs. Most people said funding. And this was another interesting thing. And I think just overall, we don't have to go through the full survey. I'd be curious to hear your questions, but I felt so the survey brought up more questions for me, actually,
Yeah.
as I think a lot of surveys do. But the most important need was funding. And then second to that for managers was staff accountability. But second to funding for the actual service providers, not in a managerial position, was internal support.
Oh, wow.
So that is very interesting. So the service providers are saying we need more support and we need more funding. And then the managers are saying we need more funding and we need staff to be more accountable.
Right.
And then you could go off on a million different ways, but I feel like, if staff got more internal support, maybe they'd be more accountable. It's just kind of interesting the way the numbers came back for a lot of that.
What I found was interesting was that the number one like problem I'm struggling with was like challenging behaviors, kind of like having these clients that you're having a hard time like trying to figure out how to help, but then the most important need is funding, which I think that just says a lot.
Yes. Yes.
Yes,
That's
unfortunately, like,
a great point.
because there's no funding anywhere. And
Yes.
but then number 3 comes in with resources.
Yes.
And showing that need. So that does correlate with the problem. That's the biggest.
Exactly. And so, yes. And so still for the staff saying, and staff, I mean like direct service providers, not manager levels, that was their number 3. But before and ahead of that was staff accountability for managers, which I find
Right.
very interesting
And
because personally, I felt that same way. If I had more resources to support, to even educate myself to help people with challenging behaviors, or for different interventions or whatever, making sure we have quality products and safe tools and equipment, stuff like that. I think we would have seen less overturn.
right. And then the staff said internal support was the second biggest need, which I feel like can go along with give me resources or
Yes.
supervision. So it's interesting. The managers are like staff accountability, and then like the staff's like, please, we need resources. We need
Yes.
internal.
Yep. That, like, it gives me goosebumps still, because when that came back, we were like, no way.
Yeah.
There is, and then you can see the conflict between the, managers and their staff. There's different perspectives there that's directly impacting the quality of care.
Right.
So, and then the third, or like the last thing that we obviously, if you have questions, we will explore those. But the last part of it was just 3 simple questions. Do you have tools or resources that are successful in efficiency of care? So 68 or 66% said no. And then do you have tools or resources that are successful in effectiveness of care? 59% said no. And then do you have tools or resources that are successful in enabling client independence, which is what I think TR does. It's all related to independence. 55% said no. So more than half of people working in this field, or at least that replied to the survey, of course, don't feel they have any tools or resources for efficiency, effectiveness of care, or enabling client independence. And then you go back up and they don't have resources, funding, internal support. And then I always think, who's actually getting hurt from that? It's not actually the staff, it's the people they're working with. It's the adults with developmental disabilities or people with Alzheimer's, wherever they are.
Mm-hmm. And these numbers are jarring.
They're jarring.
Question: do you have any tools or resources that are successful? You
Right.
worded it that way, or any, and
just one. Yes.
on every question they said no,
Mm-hmm.
and that are successful. So maybe they have tools and they don't feel like they're helping them very much.
Right.
So I feel like that's crazy. Like,
yeah.
the reality of things, and I would be curious to see what a music therapy survey would be like in comparison, but I think you'd still find people are still like, yes, I need more resources. Even if the numbers were different, I'd be like,
Mhm.
resources.
Mm-hmm. I think the people in these service providing positions, the TRs, the music therapists, the activity professionals, whatever, the people that are working directly with clients, however you want to say that, are doing it because they want to help. They want to see the independence. They want to do good work. They want to be proud of the work they're doing, and they want the people they're working with to feel a sense of pride as well. And when you don't feel you have support on a resource level, a tool level, an internal support level, that makes that really hard. And that's why you see these crazy high numbers of staff overturn almost in every setting, in every state.
Yeah, you answered my next question. I was going to ask you why you thought there weren't these effective resources, and the survey just kind of answered that. And I feel like you see that in the music therapy field. People are contracting, they're on their own, so they might not even have that, like an internal support of a company even, so there's even that level of things too.
Yeah.
And so then it just kind of spirals out, and you're right, it unfortunately affects the client more than anybody.
Yeah. And going back to when we were talking about being quarantined with our current state of living right now, and how important these social connections are for the people that we're working with, and that high staff overturn, it really, in my personal opinion, I don't know the research around it, but just watching it affects their mood, their mental health. It's the people that are going to be with them every day, they don't know if they're stable, if they're going to be here next month. They form these connections and then they leave.
Right.
And it's not, I get it. People have families and their own stress and things like that. But it is, I think, if we realize that the people in these positions want to help, how can we provide them resources so they can do their job, so they can stay, so the people that they're working with and for benefit? And yeah, I don't feel like, I don't know why I'm going to ask you a question. Do you feel, is there such a lack of resources? I mean, back in the 60s, the institutions kind of fell away, right? So then the community center boards, or at least in Colorado, that's what we call them, picked up for adults with developmental disabilities, picked up services and supports for them. So that's 60 years ago, and there's still not that many resources. What's your opinion on that?
I have a lot of opinions, and my opinion can go in a lot of different ways too.
Yeah.
There's the emphasis, and an important emphasis, on early childhood intervention. So I think that's why you see those resources more available online, and are more searchable. And maybe people are just thinking like, you can use these same resources, and like you can, but you have to do the extra work.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of, there's a disconnect there, because it's weird. I know music therapists are working with adults with disabilities. I know that that's not necessarily the issue, that there are only so many of us maybe in the nation, but still a lot of us do work with them. So there's definitely some kind of disconnect in either sharing resources or having the time to share them. I know sometimes resources are monetized to other music therapists, and as a new professional, it can be it's not as accessible. You have to kind of save up to find those good resources, and it's difficult because people are supporting their hard work and putting those out in the world, but sometimes it's this like line of, but then the new professionals can't afford it, and
yeah,
kind of this weird cycle that I feel like, in my opinion, this is an opinion, that I
yeah.
feel
Well,
like the field is stuck in.
yeah, but as you're talking, this survey reflects exactly what you just said. The number one need is funding. So if like new professionals had some kind of funding, whatever, they could access resources.
That's true. Even like under a job, even if you have
Yes.
resources for this,
Yes.
that's so
Yeah,
true.
because I remember working for a company and finding great resources and then asking higher up, can we get these? These would be very, very beneficial, but it wasn't in the budget.
And then that puts the pressure on the staff, the professional, to be like, okay, do I pay out of pocket for this resource?
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
so it's something, it's definitely, I feel like, a solution somewhere maybe in these managers that maybe could be more aware that no, it's not more of accountability, maybe necessarily, maybe, but like
Right.
getting more resources for your staff and supporting them more in that way.
Mhm.
And then maybe it says professionals sharing some things more openly, not everything. And obviously,
Mhm.
people are doing a lot of hard work, so they should be monetized for their work, but
Mhm.
also sharing more and maybe sharing more often. It's difficult with people in time, but maybe just even encouraging, like, hey, your voice matters, like share your
Totally.
knowledge, we need it.
Yeah, I love that. Definitely.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I think that wrapped up everything I had with the survey. I thought those were the biggest kind of like what.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. That was 2015, so but I think the same challenges still exist.
Like, are those results public?
Yeah, so we had a company change a challenge. It's dissolved now. But before I sent them out everywhere, and we did post them on the website, but now we don't have the website. So no, but you could post it. You could share the link if you wanted to
Okay, I
for
can think
everyone to take a
of
look
the
at.
PDF in the show notes.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, because I feel like people might want to look at kind of this stuff too.
Yeah,
Like,
definitely. Well, I think like we're saying, we have these opinions, and I was very careful to be like, personally, I felt this way because I don't want to bash an entire field or
and I really and like their peers
more.
and they're doing wonderful, wonderful work. So
Yes,
I don't
but
want any toes.
exactly. And so there's this fine line of what are the words we're using, but also how do we express the personal challenges we're having, and then also enough to see that we're not the only ones actually having these challenges. It's pretty nationwide and in most fields. Like just hearing me in the rec therapy and then you in music therapy sharing the same opinions that this one survey reflected is kind of fascinating. Well, I love your podcast, dude. I love it. It's so important.
Yeah, let's share as much as we can,
Yes.
especially for this one wonderful population where it just doesn't seem like across fields there are these resources for the struggling, burning out professionals. So
Hmm.
hopefully I find the survey very eye-opening, and hopefully people can, and I feel like we came up with a couple maybe solutions people could implement in if you're in a manager position, at least taking it into consideration. I know funding's a beast in its own self, but
Yeah.
even like as a manager, maybe going out of your way to find those free resources to help
Mhm.
provide to your staff.
Right. Yeah. And I think getting more data and more numbers like this, comparing the cost of staff overturn, I actually have a white paper on that too. I should have shared. I can share it with you if people are interested, but there's a tremendous cost of staff overturn.
Mhm.
So when you're looking at we need funding, you should be looking at what's your staff overturn numbers, because that's actually costing you a ton of money. That money, if you were to be able to take care of your staff, and I don't want to say you're not, but
Yeah.
take care of them in a way where they felt supported to stay, you'd actually have money to get quality resources.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, do you have any more resources for working with adults? I feel like the study's good.
Oh, yeah.
Even any projects you're currently working on too.
Yes. So my YouTube channel, even though we just talked, you can't do kit, just go check it out and just see if, because I do play the same games with the kids and the adults and they love it. Um, just maybe different music. Uh, or yeah, you and Sarah talked about that actually, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star versus whatever, but Frozen is kind of age
Right. Kind of can
wide.
transcend the ages.
Yes. So that, and then I have a Cookbook Kit that is for all independence seekers. And that's available on my website. And it's a progressive cookbook kit. So you start cooking like dressings and marinades safely. There's also other independence supports in there. So learning the difference between measuring cups and measuring spoons, and then tablespoons versus teaspoons. That is a common thing. So creating independence just in measuring, and then working with mixing, and there's stove safety activities, all kinds of different, it's a full curriculum. There's 3 different levels of difficulty. So you can work all the way up to a level 3, which is just more advanced. There's more steps. There's more difficulty of steps. There's some more safety considerations, but it's progressive. So that's available on the Spectrum Yoga website. I haven't officially released it, but it is available for purchase. And then I think that's it.
Yeah,
Really, as far as
that's awesome.
projects.
I'll make sure everything we've talked about is in the show notes, so that it's available for our listeners.
Awesome.
Any other last thoughts?
No, I just love that you're doing this. It's so important. Obviously, I thought something was needed 5 years ago. So I'm just really happy that you're doing this, because the conversation around this should be started. And then whether you disagree or not, the conversation is, you're allowing for conversation so that we can solve common issues for this population, and so that they feel supported and get independence and all of that. I just think it's great.
Awesome. Thank you. That's my hope. So,
Yes.
and I feel like you've helped contribute to that with this awesome conversation. So thank you so much for being on today.
Thank you, Bonnie. It's great.
Awesome. Well, have a great day.
All right, you too.
How wonderful was that conversation with Christine? There were so many good points to walk away with, and I feel like I learned a lot from the conversation to inform my practice and kind of my community moving forward too. I loved how we discussed breathing and giving opportunities instead of over prompting, and also really encouraging adults with disabilities to try new things. I loved hearing about Christine's yoga and recreation and cooking services and all the great things she's doing for the community, and cannot wait to check out her resources more too. And our discussion about telehealth, I feel like, was really opening to the struggles our adult clients are having during this time, where we have to quarantine and stay away from people, and how we can work to support them and their needs more by remembering that they have sensory and emotional needs that can be met in the different services we provide, instead of maybe the goals we are working on, because things have shifted. And I loved Christine said that yoga is about being present and just being with our clients during this time in the online formats that we can provide these services with. And the difference between adults and children, and talking to adults and children. I really liked that part of our conversation as well. And then, of course, we ended talking about the resources, or the lack thereof, and kind of concluded that we're stuck in this kind of funding cycle where there's no funding for resources, so then people can't receive the resources to work with this awesome population. So how can we as individuals or managers or the different positions we're in, how can we try to break this cycle? How can we share more? How can we find more funding? How can we find more resources, make more resources to better serve this population? And hopefully this podcast will serve as part of that mission, and we will continue to interview awesome people and figure out how we can serve adults with disabilities as best as we can. It's an awesome conversation with Christine. So really quick, I wanted to talk about this month's session plan. So this is a session plan for music therapy I made back in February. It starts with the same hello song, La Bamba, and then Shake, Rattle, and Roll, where the group's divided into 3 instruments. Then a winter mashup, because it was back in February, so you can maybe do a spring mashup, 2 different songs paired with 2 different instruments, and the group listens for different auditory cues to know when to switch instruments and songs. My Can You Copy Me group echoing rhythm intervention. Then it followed by Ring of Fire, where the verses and the chorus are separated into 2 forms with 2 different rhythms that the group plays on different rhythmic instruments. songwriting was Oh, I Love Me, an original song I wrote where clients can fill in the blank of what they love about themselves. And then we can sing it as a group. And then we ended with a relaxation with scarves to recorded music while the kibasa went around the group. And we ended with our same goodbye song, Na Na, Hey Hey, Kiss Them Goodbye. So for a more detailed implementation of this session plan, it is available for Patreon supporters on my second tier Patreon patrons, where for $10 a month you get one of these extended session plans every month, as well as what the $5 patrons get, which is access to these episodes at least a week early and ad-free episodes. So if you'd like to support the podcast and become a navigator, go to patreon.com /navigating adulthood and IDD. And all that will be in the show notes, as well as Christine's awesome resources. Thank you so much for listening. Other ways to support this podcast is to share it with someone you think would like to listen. Reach out if you have knowledge and perspectives that you'd like to share, maybe be interviewed on the podcast, or rating us on iTunes and leaving a review. All these would be awesome ways to support the podcast and keep building up this community so that we can have these resources and hear from adults with disabilities. Thank you so much for listening, and I will catch you guys in the next episode.
This podcast is by Rhythmic Roots Music Therapy, with content and music produced by Bonnie Hout. Thanks for listening.